along came Agile, and for a moment, it looked like a threat. So the power
Hmm.
structure co-opted it, and now it wasn't a threat anymore. Now the people who are extracting more than their share of the value can still extract more than their share of the value, and the people who are working away for crumbs, picking up crumbs on the floor, they still are picking up crumbs on the floor. So everything's, as far as the power structure is concerned, everything's just fine. We're back to the status quo.
Today's guest is Kent Beck, original signer of the Agile Manifesto, creator of extreme programming, and all-around programming legend. In this chat, we discuss the state of Agile in 2024 and how it has been somewhat co-opted by the power structure. We talk about the importance of psychological safety, short feedback loops, and engineers' ownership. We explore different approaches to Agile at different company stages and discuss the challenges and opportunities presented by AI in software development. So let's dive in, right after a short word from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by OneSchema, the embeddable CSV importer for SaaS that helps your teams save months of development time. While companies often scope one engineering month to build a CSV importer, they end up taking over 3 to 6 months to build all the features needed to make the importer usable for their customers. Customer files are full of unexpected data and formatting. Missing key features like a UI for easily fixing errors drastically reduces import success rates and causes endless emails for your support team. Enter OneSchema. With a large library of pre-built validations and robust SDKs, OneSchema helps you launch CSV import in hours, not quarters. Get your customers to the value of your product in minutes and let them say goodbye to frustrating messages like import error on line 53. Importing clean customer data into your product is now easier than ever. Learn more by visiting oneschema.co. Hey, Kent, thank you so much
Hey,
for being here with us.
Luca, it's my pleasure. It's great to talk to you in person for the first time.
Yes, finally, so happy. And I have so many things I would love to ask you. I bet we could stay here all day, but I promise it won't happen.
Oh, I promise too.
yeah, yeah. So let's dive straight into it. The first thing I want to talk about with you is, it's such a privilege to be able to talk with you that you have been around in the industry for so long. It's like you have lived through many eras of different ways of thinking about how to do engineering stuff, how to write software. And so I would love to start with a little bit of the big picture, right? Because you are one of the 17 original signers of the Agile Manifesto in 2001.
Not just one of. I am the first.
The first, so
Yeah,
even better.
alphabetically, but yeah, the first.
Alphabetically still counts. So you're the first signer of the Agile Manifesto. We will edit this out, so I will just say you're the first signer of the manifesto.
No, that's okay. I like that joke. So.
And so when it comes to Agile, my feeling is that the word itself is so ubiquitous today that sometimes it feels like it lost part of its meaning. You know, it's like when you say a word many times out loud and after a while loses meaning in your head. And I've seen recent interviews of yours when you say even that waterfall is kind of sneakingly coming back in some environments, even in startups. So my question is, what do you think it is the state of Agile in 2024? I mean, is it where you want it to be?
I don't have a where I want it to be. Software development certainly sucks most of the time, and that's not what I wanted. That's not what I want.
Yeah.
Yeah. The problem with that word agile is it's too attractive.
Mhm.
People complained about extreme programming when I came up with that
Yeah.
name. And it's definitely, it has some pluses and minuses. But if you haven't done the actual hard work to become an extreme programmer, you're never going to claim that you are one, because it's just kind of like,
Yeah.
it's a little too cringy. But agile, everybody wants to be agile. Nobody wants to be rigid or inflexible. So nobody's ever going to say that they're not agile. So
Yeah.
that's from the very, and I said that at the meeting. This word is not defensible as a brand. It's not
Hmm.
defensible because everybody's going to co-opt it, and that's exactly what happened. So I'm not surprised. So I'm not disappointed. But here's how I see it now.
Hmm.
There's a power structure at work, and that power structure defends its own power.
Hmm.
And along came Agile, and for a moment, it looked like a threat. So the power
Hmm.
structure co-opted it, and now it wasn't a threat anymore. Now the people who are extracting more than their share of the value can still extract more than their share of the value, and the people who are working away for crumbs, picking up crumbs on the floor, they still are picking up crumbs on the floor. So everything's, as far as the power structure is concerned, everything's just fine. We're back to the status quo.
Yeah. So why do you think it was kind of a threat to the status quo? So because you felt like it empowers people who otherwise wouldn't be part of the decision process or wouldn't be
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
the game.
Yeah. So for example, and I'm a geek, so this is I take a programmer perspective. But if you say, hey, programmers have a strong role to play in choosing what they work on next. That is the
Yeah.
exact opposite of what the power structure wants. This very legible. I take the problem, I break it into pieces, I hand out the pieces to people who don't question. They just execute everything perfectly on time. Give me the pieces back. I'm going to integrate everything, and now we're done, and everything's fine.
Yeah.
And reality doesn't work like that. But if you're in power, you can insist that everybody pretend that that's how everything works.
Yeah.
And so that's exactly what we've gotten back to, as opposed to expecting software development to be this swirl, this complicated melange of discovery and execution,
Yeah.
where individual relationships are tremendously important to the trajectory of the entire product, not in a way you can control, but in a way that you can encourage.
Yeah.
Well, that feels very out of control. If you're used to being at the center of the decision making and the power, wow, that sounds horrible. Because what role do I play? Well, a really important role, in fact, if you choose to, but mostly people don't choose to. So it's that kind of dynamic that I see. And as soon as you say, well, the power structures going to reassert itself. The waterfall is a beautiful expression of that power structure.
Hmm.
We're going to say exactly what we're going to do. You can't, because you don't know what you're going to do.
Yeah.
We're going to, and if even if you did that, it's not what you would want looking back.
Yeah.
But that waterfall is very much that very legible structure of work, very much it's your responsibility, and it's my I get the rewards and you pay the penalties for anything that goes wrong. That power structure is very much embedded in that waterfall style. So I'm not surprised that you put the same ingredients in the bowl and you end up with the same cake. I
Yeah.
was Part of what I was doing was recommending a new set of ingredients.
Yeah.
And the people who liked the old ingredients, but didn't much like the cake, but they did like the ingredients, so they just said, no, 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 we don't want to,
Yeah.
we don't want that. The last team that I coached, or managed rather, I managed the team. My boss came to me and said, "Well, when is it going to be done?" I said, "Well, nobody knows what it is, so I
Yeah.
can't give you an answer." And he said, "Yeah, no, I understand. I appreciate the principles, but when's it going
But
to be
tell
done?"
me, yes,
Yeah,
yes,
just give me an answer. I have to give an answer. And my heart goes out to him because he had people demanding of him things that questions he couldn't possibly answer. But I wasn't going to pass that along to my team. As
yeah,
soon as I say a date, I've got downside and I got no upside. If I hit that date, if I don't hit that date, boom. So I'm not going to I'm not going to create those incentives for my team, but it was incredibly stressful to work in that environment. I ended up with migraines and arthritis and I ended up quitting.
yeah.
And it was just like, no, I don't want to work in that kind of environment. But what is the environment? Boy, I feel like uh, what is that environment where my boss isn't being asked,
Yeah,
from my perspective, dumb questions, unanswerable questions. Let me call it unanswerable questions that he feels compelled to make up answers to or delegate making up answers to me. What does that environment look like?
look like.
And it's going to be a different shape than the current sort of standard business model.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think it's a great take, and it highlights the fact that even though we progress technology-wise, we get more and more sophisticated with tools and ways of doing things. Then in the end, it's like you said. I mean, engineering is pretty much about human relationships between people who do things, and so problems stay the same across the years, the decades, and so on.
Yeah, until people change.
But do
It's not
people
about
change?
inventing a better type system for your programming language. That's not
Yeah,
going to change. I mean, at the margin, a little bit. And as a geek, I appreciate technical progress,
yeah,
but until people are willing to trade one form of power for another form of power, yeah, none of it's going to actually change fundamentally.
yeah. And do you think, because I'm back to, you mentioned extreme programming before, which is, of course, one of um, your most famous pieces of work. And in extreme programming, you advocate for a number of practices who have been proven successful over time, but in many contexts, they are still divisive. Think
Yeah,
of pair programming or TDD and
TDD even.
continuous integration, even in some cases. Do you think that these practices still meet resistance because of relationship dynamics, or how do you
Oh,
feel about them?
100%. So TDD has become this religious touch point, which,
Yeah,
like,
it's
people
one of
just,
those.
you can't make me write tests. I'm like, I'm not trying to make you write tests.
Yeah,
I don't care.
yeah,
Like, why are you yelling at me? Like, wow, this is not about me and this is not about TDD. So when I dig into those conversations, the theme that comes up over and over again is the theme that we introduced with JUnit. We said programmers are responsible for the quality of their work, not QA, not reviewers. The individual programmers are
yeah,
responsible for the quality of their work. And if I just, kind of wagged my finger about that, it would be unfair. So here's a tool, JUnit, here's techniques like TDD that will help you be responsible because you're making a
yeah,
bunch of mistakes now that are being handled by other people on very long time frames. So,
yeah,
how can you catch those mistakes sooner? How can you reduce the number of defects that pass downstream? If
yeah,
you're responsible, if you actually want to deal with the consequences of your own mistakes, you're going to reduce the number of mistakes that you make. And over in these conversations, the most emotional reactions to TDD, people say, I can't be responsible for the quality of my work. If there are errors, somebody else is going to have to pay the price for that, which to me is a very dysfunctional relationship with work, with yourself, with your
Yeah.
colleagues, with your customers. I understand that it's uncomfortable to deal with the consequences of your own errors,
Yeah.
but it's just way better than saying, I can't do
Yes.
it.
Wash your hands. Yeah. That's a great take. I never thought about this from this angle. So you think basically it's a case where it's like the king is naked, right? I mean, if you do TDD, you're put in front of your own responsibility and the fact that you are doing things. I mean, you can't do things sloppily. Let's say that as many programmers otherwise probably do more often than they would like to admit.
Sure, because we're all under pressure. Everything has to get done faster, sooner, cheaper, better. And if you don't have, if all there is pressure to
Yeah,
report progress on faster, sooner, cheaper, better, then you're going to get reports of progress, but you're not going to get faster, sooner, better, cheaper. And
yeah,
that's why I have always worked. One thread of my work is bottom up to say, all right, I'm not going to wag my finger and say, hey, you're writing too many bugs. I'm going to talk about ways that you can find the defects sooner. You can
yeah,
eliminate their root causes. You can have feedback loops that show you when you make mistakes so that you can make your mistakes in private instead of having them be in public.
yeah. And speaking of pressure that you mentioned, how do you ease that pressure? How do you set up a relationship with people you work with? You know, with whom you exchange ideas, requirements, things to be done in a way that you have less pressure as an engineer, and that ties in. Even I'm seeing questions popping up in the chat. Dobbs is asking, how do we resolve this conflict between the business needs and the outputs and budgets? And I think that that is the same thing. I mean, the pressure that is on the shoulders of engineers.
Well, there's one school of engineering which is the kind of the this is my dad's take. My dad was a electrical engineer who became a programmer. You know, I grew up in Silicon Valley before it was Silicon Valley and all that stuff. His perspective is just leave me the hell alone. I'm going to do my job. I do a really good job. When the date comes, you'll have the stuff. Just get out of my face. Quite what's the word? I confrontive.
Hmm. Hmm.
And if you're good enough as an engineer, you can kind of make that work, but then eventually it runs out of gas. And sometimes when you fail hard. So XP takes kind of the opposite. It says, we're going to take the value that we intend to deliver and we're going to turn it into tiny slices.
Yeah.
And we're going to use those slices to build a relationship with people who currently don't trust us. Business doesn't
Yeah.
trust programmers. We make promises, we don't keep them all the time for decades. It's not just our fault. It's our parents' fault and their parents' fault that's built this dysfunctional relationship. But the way to rebuild that relationship is to deliver functionality that other people care about on a regular basis. Now, that
Yeah.
means we have to engineer in ways that we might otherwise not. You know, we
Hmm.
have some refactoring, and instead of doing it in a month where we just turn off all feature development for a month, we're going to spend 4 months, 6 months doing that same refactoring a little bit at a time while we deliver features.
Yeah.
That's so once the business knows it's going to get something. I mean, that's the biggest fear on the business side is we're going to make in all this investment, we're going to get nothing for it, and we won't know until the last minute, and we're going to look stupid. That's a
Yeah.
horrible position to put somebody in. So I want them out of that position as after 2% of the budget of the project has been spent. Oh, we're not going to get nothing. Now, the thing we have janky and inefficient and won't scale, but we're actually solving business problems today that we couldn't solve last week. Oh, okay. So we're
Yes.
not getting nothing. All right. So we're going to make some progress and we can steer and we can change priorities. And we don't have the power to say you're not going fast enough. That's the one thing you can't. If you go to the team and say, hey, you just have to go faster, yeah, you're going to get reported compliance and it's going to mess up all the relationships that you've been working to build. So you can say, hey, I have this need. Hey, I'm afraid I'm not going to get this need met. As a business person, you can say those things. And then the engineers are going to be activated to whatever degree you have that relationship to actually meet your needs. And that may not be exactly the feature that you were imagining. There might be some other way of solving the problem. But the more you trust each other, the more you can elevate the conversation to the level of needs
Yeah.
instead of being down at the level of this implementation, that implementation, where your hands are
Yeah.
just tied for how you're going to create value. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, even in my relatively small experience, what I've seen is that if you are able to shift the conversation from final estimates, and final deliveries to a process that works on a weekly basis, on a bi-weekly basis. I mean, even the business people get something done that is usable, that creates value for the user every week or every 2 weeks or something. Then there is
Week,
way less pressure. Yes, every week.
every week. This 2 weeks
You,
thing.
it's too much. I agree.
Dude, forever. It's forever.
And,
Oh,
and
do you
I mean,
know
if
this?
you're able to do so, what I was saying is, then the pressure and the tension on the final delivery is goes off. I mean, it's way,
Fi-
way, way less than it is.
Final means failure.
Yes, yes,
If you have a software system and there's no way for the business to invest more into it in order to achieve more profit,
of
that
course.
system is now dead,
Yeah,
and that's failure.
yeah,
That's why I just but that mind shift, if I buy a car and the car's not there, I don't have a car,
yeah,
right? We're
yeah,
we're really clear on this. If I buy some software, the development of some software, and bits of it come and I can already transport myself, but not as fast as
yeah,
I want to with my car, and
yeah,
it just keeps getting better and better and better every week. We develop stronger trust.
yeah, yeah.
And
Absolutely.
that's the world that I want to do my work in.
Yeah, and I think it's just it's funny how much of agile advice and even XP, of course, it's about doing things more frequently. I mean, creating shorter feedback loop for pretty much everything. I mean,
Everything
talk
forever.
more, talk more with customers more frequently, ship code more frequently, review code more frequently, do per program, review code continuously.
Eh,
I mean,
Right.
everything. I mean, it's doing things not faster, but in smaller iteration, in smaller batches.
Correct. Which leads to less waste, which leads to you accomplishing more in the same amount of time, but not because you went faster, but because you had less wasted motion. And anytime you hit the limits of that, that's this 2 week versus 1 week thing. Just drives me nuts. Well, we can't accomplish anything that the users care about in 1 week. And there's a Thinky. You've been reading Thinkies, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so my paying Substack customers get a weekly Thinky, which is this habit of creative thought. I started gathering right here. This is the original
The original
list of
thinking.
Thinkies where when I had ideas and I knew where they came from, I would just jot down the thinking trick. So one of the thinkies is called can't because. And can't because says anytime somebody says we can't do X that we want to do because of Y, you always flip that around and you say, well, when Y is no longer true, then we'll be able to do X. Is it worth trying to make Y no longer true? So we can't accomplish anything the users care about in 1 week. Therefore, we have to have 2-week sprints.
Yeah.
That's a perfect can't because. When we can accomplish something the users care about every week, then we can have 1-week sprints. Oh, okay. Well, what would that take? Well, let's look at where our time goes. And 90% of time in software development, 95% of the time is just work items just waiting in some queue.
Yes.
So let's
Yes.
look at the handoffs we have and why we have those handoffs and how else we could arrange the work so that we didn't need those handoffs, so that we can get rid of the queues, so there's less waiting time, so we can actually accomplish something the user cares about by Friday. That's just such a
Yeah.
great feeling to go into the weekend knowing every single
Yeah.
weekend, hey, the system is better for other people because of what I did.
Yeah.
And then you can
Yeah.
just kind of cook on it. And then about Sunday, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you're like, all right, let's get to it. And then you can come in Monday morning and you're just ready to chew nails. It's just like, let me at it. That's a great feeling. Why wouldn't you want to do that? But for whatever reason, people, we can't accomplish anything in a week. So that's an
Yeah,
excuse.
because
Of
I
course you can.
think because I think sometimes people think that accomplishing things and something means releasing something that is very polished. I mean, that is kind of this final mindset mentality. While
Yeah.
instead, I mean, I'm tying in also the comment by Rado here in chat that says, very rightfully so, I think, that as long as something is only in people's heads, everyone can see it differently. While if you put it out there, even if it's imperfect, it's incomplete, it helps, I mean, 100% the conversation on how to improve it, how to make it better, because it anchors all the conversation with people.
That question went a different direction than I expected. I thought it was going to be as long as it's in differently in everybody's heads and you don't make it concrete, then you don't have to deal with the conflict.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can be
It's,
imagining the system, you can be imagining a system, and the fact that they're different just doesn't matter. And as soon as you make it concrete and you get the example out there, he's like, that's not what that looks like. And I say, yes, it sure is what it looks like. And then we have to deal with the fact that we see things differently. In the
yeah.
XP world, that's the goal is to make that conversation safe for all the participants.
Yeah.
Because it's inevitable. Of course, people aren't going to see that future the same. They're not even going to see the present the same. So let's put it all on the table and then decide what we're going to do next.
Yeah. Do you think that is the foundations of being able to create in XP environments that is, psychological safety, trust, that you can have a healthy conflict about
Foundations. I think the
different views, and then
foundations
if you
are
have that foundations, yeah,
so I think the foundation is an organization as a whole that's willing to let go of the illusion of predictability in favor of creating the ability to adapt. So
okay,
the analogy I've always used is, do you build a seawall or do you learn how to surf? You're dealing with waves. Do you
that's a
build
great
this
analogy.
seawall behind which you can pretend like the ocean is smooth?
Yeah,
And that works until we have the storms we had in California in the past couple of weeks. Or do you learn to surf? You paddle out there and you're like, all right, well, there's all this variation that's happening, and I'm going to get good at adapting to the variation that's happening. And
Yeah.
then regardless of what the wave looks like, I'm going to be able to surf it. If it's a little wave, I can surf it. If it's a big wave, I can surf it.
Yeah. Perfect analogy, I think.
So if the organization all the way up, though, needs to be prepared to learn to surf.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think there are types of companies at different scale, I don't know, that are better equipped to do that? I mean, you have worked at many different companies. For example, you have stayed at Facebook for a very long time in a moment of high growth. Do you think startups are more naturally, apt to get in this mindset, or than big tech, or it doesn't matter your product stage or your scale as a team?
No, I think it matters a lot. I talk about this in 3X, the explore, expand, extract model,
Yeah,
which is talking about how differently you need to behave as an engineer, as a manager, as a product manager, as an investor when you're exploring, just looking for a new source of value. And then
yeah,
something blows up. And I was talking to you before we started about Rent-A-Kent, this personalized model I'm building, where I'm putting everything I've ever written into it to see how good it can be from my perspective. So this morning, that took off in a way that we just haven't seen before. People having longer, more extended conversations with it. The answers being mostly pretty good instead of sometimes interesting, but oftentimes completely off. That's this. Okay, now we're in this expand phase.
yeah,
It's like, all right, how can we deliver as much of that as possible to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible to take advantage of this moment? But that's a very different style of engineering, a different style
yeah,
of management. It's different financing, everything, than the one where you're just trying out lots of little, very diverse, very creative experiments.
yeah,
And then the extract is all right. Now growth has kind of become predictable instead of this rocket ship, and growth has become predictable. How do you take resources out of that to feed the next one? And then the really mature companies, the really effective companies recognize the difference between those three phases, and they don't try and put every piece of development
yeah,
they do into the same box. So
yeah.
that was a lesson that I learned at Facebook at 2,000 people, which is
Okay.
ridiculously large to be able to juggle all three phases at the same time.
Yeah,
And then by the time I left 2017, it was not like that at all. It was very much
yeah.
all projects were very extracty. You had to
Hmm.
prove that ROI, blah, 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 which is all, of course, completely made up numbers, but you suddenly had to make up numbers instead of just trying some stuff and it didn't work, throw it away.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think, yeah, I loved your talk. I watched it on YouTube about the three phases, and I think a lot of problems are born from not realizing sometimes that what got you here won't get you there. You need different styles and approaches to
Sure.
doing things.
And it works against human nature, right?
Yeah,
You try out a bunch of crazy ideas and one of them works. You want to try out a bunch more crazy ideas.
yeah, yes, yeah.
And then that one that was really working dies because you weren't able to scale it.
Yeah, 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 totally. And speaking of Facebook, I want to pick up a quick question more on engineering side that Clemens asked in chat. Clemens is asking, why is nobody doing stacked diffs, which feels so much better than the standard GitHub flow? And it's become kind of the legend that Facebook is doing that, maybe even Uber and other big tech companies, but it has not picked up yet by us mere mortals.
Okay, so I've got my spicy take on stack diffs. So this
Please
is
go.
I finished a piece of work which is complete in some way. Like
Okay.
it should be deployable. I
Yeah,
think every diff should be deployable. Okay,
of
so
course.
this is deployable, but I want to keep working, but I have to wait for a blocking asynchronous code review,
Yeah.
which anyway, that's a whole nother topic. you keep me back on whatever the
Other
original
hot
question
takes
was. Just
coming.
remind me of it when I slow down. Okay. So um, I want to keep going. So I'm going to start working on the next diff after this,
Yeah.
as if the first one has already been accepted.
Yeah.
But then what happens when I get feedback on it and I have to change it, and then I have to change the next that succeeding one. So this is kind of like speculative execution
Yeah.
in a CPU, where we're going to
Great analogy.
continue as if we already fetched this memory location. And
Yeah.
then if it turns out that those assumptions, or we're going to take this branch prediction, same thing. We're going to take this branch as if this test is going to return true. And then if it returns false, we're going to undo all the work we did.
Yeah.
So I see what that lets you do as a programmer is code reviews are only kind of blocking.
Yeah.
I still have the question of could we not have code reviews? Like, go back and read the original paper on code reviews, which I sent out a reference to somebody just the other day, and I can't remember. Maybe we can track it down afterwards and put it in the show notes. If you want to do
Yeah.
reviews
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that, then that's code reviews. And that is everybody on the
Yeah.
team looking at your diff and spending several hours poring over it, and then getting together in a room and discussing every line of the change you propose making for
Yeah.
hours more. Like, I can imagine that process, tedious as hell, but it would create a lot of value.
Yeah.
But I think this blind copying of the blocking asynchronous code review style, that workflow for
Yeah.
collaboration, that's by far the problem. I think
Yeah.
there are other ways of getting the same needs met without the huge costs that we pay.
Yeah. I
So,
think. I
yeah,
mean, mind you, I don't have a solution that I feel it's the best. You should do this, but sometimes I just feel it's crazy that we put an incredible amount of effort, maybe in shaving off like 10 minutes or 15 minutes our CI/CD process, and then we are happy with the code sitting idle for like hours and hours and days sometimes,
yeah,
waiting for somebody to pick up the review. So there has to be there has to be different ways of doing that. Of course, one way is pair programming, as you have said. I mean, the code is reviewed continuously, and I guess in those cases you don't need other external reviewers. So I mean, you may want it, but it's not. You may be happy with that. So
yeah, yeah. And then my other crazy idea is what if code review was asynchronous but non-blocking? So
yeah,
what if you had something like a news feed, but it tells
yeah,
you all the changes that are going on in the code base right now?
yeah,
So like you pop up Facebook to see I mean, you used to pop up Facebook to see what your friends were doing, and
yeah,
now that's not so true anymore. But anyway, you could pop this tool open and it'd say, oh, in some far distant part of the code base, seems like there's a big refactoring going on. But this file that you changed 3 times last week, somebody else just changed it. Okay, well, that's news. It's like a ticker. It's news that I
yeah,
care about. And I think it would be possible to build that kind of ticker functionality that would give you high density, high relevance information about the changes that are going on in the system as a whole without paying the cost of all his blocking, all
yeah.
of the queuing time, waiting time, all the additional variation that comes up with. And stacked diffs are a reasonable response to an unreasonable system. That's my take on stacked diffs.
Yeah. I pretty much agree. There is even a framework. I don't know if you know about it. That is called ship show ask. That it buckets types of changes that you can make to the code in these 3 categories, and based on complexity and how critical they are. And it says ship changes. It's very small changes. You can directly ship them, no review, no whatsoever. Then on the other side of the spectrum, you have the ask, where you should stop and wait for a review. But then you have the show, which is kind of middle ground, where you ship things and ask for a review later, which is non-blocking. And the key idea is that actually, if you work in small batches and stuff, most of the things that you do can belong to the show category, where you get a review, but it doesn't have to block the whole workflow. So the exact breakdown may change based on your situation, but might feel reasonable rather than, an extreme approach in one sense or in another sense. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't see my approach as actually being extreme, but I see what you're saying, and
Yeah.
yeah, this is part of the responsibility that we were talking about.
Yeah.
By saying this is a show
Yeah.
and not an ask, you're
Yeah.
saying I take full responsibility for the
Exactly.
consequences of this diff. And
Yeah.
if it breaks something, then we want to find out about it right away. Now, one of the things I learned in writing Tidy First, this first book on software design, was the difference between behavior changes and structure changes. Because most structure changes are completely reversible. If I extract a helper function and you say, that doesn't need to be there, and you inline the function, like,
Who
right?
cares? Yeah.
But if I change the expected result of a computation, that tends to be irreversible. If I send the wrong numbers to the tax authorities, undoing that change is going to be much more expensive than doing the change.
Yeah.
So you need to be much more careful about behavior changes to the system than you
Yeah.
are about structure changes, because the
Yeah.
structure changes are, for the most part, reversible. Reversible decisions, you can do those are in the ship or show category.
Yeah.
Just do them.
Yeah.
It does mean, as a programmer, if I have some work and I want to change the structure of the system, I want to do some software design, but I also want to like add some new test cases and make them pass. I need to separate those kinds of work. Now, maybe it's all the structure changes first and then the behavior changes after. That's the tidy first
Yeah. Okay.
workflow. Or maybe it's the reverse, or maybe they're interlaced in some kind of way. That's new work that I have to do as an engineer, rather than just saying I've got this big diff and there's some refactorings and there's some new test cases and there's some existing test cases where I change the assertions, and it's all lumped together. Well, what? As a reader, how am I supposed to like sign in blood that this is okay? I can't. I just go LGTM and away we go.
Yeah. Yeah. We are back to trust and ownership and good relationships. I mean, I
Yeah,
wanna touch on a different topic, because you mentioned, for example, rent account and other things with ChatGPT. So I want to pick up a little bit on the AI topic,
sure.
because your most famous tweet as of today is I quoted about your skills. So you said that now 90% of your skills are obsolete. I mean, the context of you trying Copilot or ChatGPT for writing code for the first time, you said that 90% of your skills are now obsolete, but the leverage of the remaining 10% is up like 100%. 100 times, not 100%.
A thousand X.
A
Hang on,
thousand
quote
X.
it, quote
Okay.
it. There you go.
If I quote you, I have to quote you right. So you said that you need to adapt, and you need to discover what is valuable, that versus what has suddenly become cheap. So my question is, have you found that? Have you adjusted?
Am adjusting. It's that world of new models and improvements to models, and people saying, "Wow, last week I got 37 in the new drop of the whatever library, and now I'm getting 55, and I didn't have to change a thing." Like that. That's commonplace now, and so this
Yeah.
is one of these surfing situations where the waves break in all kinds of ways, and the best you can do is hope to be able to surf it. So I would say I am adapting. An experiment I did this week, it's Wednesday, yeah, that I did this week was I have this new book, Tidy First,
Yeah.
wherever there's a copy someplace. Um, uh, and it's intended for geeks.
Yeah.
But if geeks read it and their managers tell them not to do it, it's not going to have any kind of impact. So I thought, can I write an executive briefing? Can I take this? It's a small book. I get it. But it's about value. It's not about weight. um, if can I take that? Can I take that 3-hour reading and save an executive 90% of that time? Can I write a
Yeah.
briefing that somebody can read from a not day-to-day technical background and kind of get a sense of the whole thing?
Yeah.
Well, that would be good. It'd be good for the engineers who are reading Tidy First and want to execute this stuff and are getting pushback. It'd be good for the executives. It'd be good for their customers. Like, yeah, that would be good. It's gonna be a lot of work.
Yeah.
Well, I got a day. I have a day free. Can I get ChatGPT to write this and not just generic ChatGPT because I'm working on this Rent-A-Kent project? I thought, can I get Rent-A-Kent to write this whole executive briefing? And it was fascinating to figure out the instructions I wanted to give to a language model for what the next chapter should say. I had to be very
Yeah.
clear about the goal of this chapter is to take somebody who understands this and help them. And at the end of the chapter, they're gonna understand this new thing and
Yeah.
use analogies or use this particular analogy. And here's the 3 bullet points to make sure you hit. And then at the end of it, there's going to be a chapter hook to the next chapter, which is on this topic. So transition between the topic of this chapter to the topic of the next chapter. Like
Yeah.
that's writing. I'm writing not character by character or word by word or sentence by sentence, but I'm writing like goal by goal, which
Yeah.
is a kind of thought process that always has been going on in my head as I write, and I've written 5 million words. That thought process is pretty refined in my head. I know how I want to string ideas together, but I've never had to be this explicit with it. Okay, so
Yeah.
at the end of a day, I had 5,500 words, which is like 3x as many words as I usually produce, but they're
Yeah.
ChatGPT words, even though they're Rent-A-Kent, trained
Yeah.
on my writing and my style and so on. Oh, just the dumb mistakes that language models make from my perspective as a writer. So I spent 2 days editing everything, and I have an executive briefing and it's written in my voice. And there were a couple of surprising moments in there where I thought, well, that's a really good analogy. I haven't thought of
Yeah.
that before. So
Yeah.
there are ways in which the end result is better than what I would have written. It's for sure done way sooner and with way less variance than if I'd waited for myself to sit down and start typing chapter 1 word by word.
Yeah.
The ChatGPT version was just bad. It was just good enough that it was worth being pissed off about.
Yeah.
But that was the emotional energy that I needed to go in there and go, no, that's not the point. Switch this
Yeah.
with this. And so my writing skills, my ability to put words in a row in a sentence, which I've worked very hard on, not so leveraged. But my ability to say, well, here's the 8 chapters, and here's the order they go in, and here's the way they hook to each other. That ability has become much higher leverage. I could churn out a new one of these every week if I had topics to churn them out
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
And I've never been, but that's not a skill I'd even realized that I'd had before I had this experience. So that's an
Yeah.
example of the 10% of the skills now have tremendous leverage.
Yeah, this is
But
this is all extremely interesting to me because I constantly wonder how this eventually changes the workflow of we as teams, for example, doing things with these models using prompts and prompt engineering You made an example of creating an executive summary. It could be anything. I mean, it could be creating code. I mean, what I always wonder is whether this style of interaction will act as, the most declarative language that we have ever, invented. Just declare what you want and you have it. And then I don't know where we go from there. We will version control prompts, or what will become it's wild. I don't know whether, because on some level there are people saying we have kept inventing new languages simpler and simpler on top of each other for decades. So this is just one of those times. At the same
Yeah.
time, it doesn't feel like that exactly, because we are still, when the models create code, we are still then working on the code that the models have created. So it's not exactly like that. So I don't have an answer for this.
Yeah, nor do I. I find it fascinating.
Yeah.
I think we're on the brink of, I've called it a new form of literature.
Yeah.
So the things that I typed in as prompts,
Yeah.
that's writing. That's what writing looks like. That's a way that writing looks now that it
Yeah.
didn't look before. It's also, though, a lot like programming. Like, what in the hell is going on? And generate
Yeah.
something. You're like, nah, that's not it. What's going on in that thing? How can I change the instructions to this machine, except the machine is inscrutable, non-deterministic, like, blah. It's like programming a chip where the instructions change their definitions as the program executes in ways
Yeah.
that you can't predict, but it's still programming. So it's
Yeah.
it's somewhere in between here. And my big vision, I've got a lot of aide memoire around me. I use index cards. I use Apple Notes. I use I draw pictures. I put little notes in notebooks and so on. I can see that, in this vague sort of futury sense. I can see that all of those thoughts going into a model,
Yeah.
and then that model becomes rendered in various ways. So you
Yeah.
can come, I can say, all right, here's a book, which is like take these things out of the model and we'll turn it into a book, and then now you can have it, which would be kind of like vinyl has become for musicians today, right? You stream this, you stream that, you blah, 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 blah. You try the acoustic version, you have a
Yeah.
collab with somebody, and then you're like, well, those 12 things go together. Let me press that on vinyl and sell it. That's what books are going to become. I, as an intellectual person living an intellectual life, I'm going to take my ideas and pour it into this model. And then every once in a while, I'm going to say, all right, well, here's a release, here's a thing. And then I'll print it up on beautiful paper and send that out to people. And it'll, kind of, it's useful. You can read it. It evokes some kind of nostalgia. But the thing is this model that I'm working with on a
Yeah.
regular basis.
Yeah.
So
Uh,
that's where I see this going over the long haul.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with your take, and I also love Clemens what he's saying in chat, saying that basically these models let you leverage your taste and your discernment. So basically, if there was a gap, I think between people's taste and skills, this gap is way smaller today, because if you have good taste for the good result, you can do way more than taste is one of those skills whose leverage it's now like 1,000 times.
Yes, and taste comes from the exercise, the faltering exercise of skill.
Yeah.
That's a tweet right there. The way you get taste and judgment is by doing the work, seeing the mistakes, learning the lessons, getting the insights. Oh my goodness, if I'd only done this and done this thing in this order instead of that order, things would have worked so much better. That's how you get taste. So you can't skip the exercise of skills, but those skills have become accelerated now in a way that we didn't. I certainly didn't expect to see coming.
Yeah, at this speed, especially.
Yeah.
I was asking, taking the question by Clemens in chat. How would you TDD an LLM application? How would you test design? I mean, how would you design an application to be with TDD with AI? This is actually, I mean, if you can make this a little bit broader, there is, I think, a broader question that is, will we make AI write tests, or we write tests for code that is written by AI, or kind of, where will this leave us as as programmers? But I don't want to digress.
Okay, so yeah, I want to answer that question if we have time to ask it again.
Sure.
So I heard two different questions. One is, you want to build a personalized model. How do you apply a TDD style workflow to fine tuning the model?
Or yeah, or
That's
more in general, probably if you do TDD already for any of your engineering work, how do you combine doing TDD with doing engineering work supported by AI? I think that was more of the general
okay.
question.
Okay, if that's the question, then we did an interesting experiment in Mechanical Orchard, my day job, where we had two chatbots, and you'd ask one, please write a test for this, and it would write the test, and we'd copy it and paste it to the other chatbot and said, please write code that passes this test. Out it comes, and then we say, so we got these two bots talking to each other. The problem
Yeah.
is there's some like information theory minimum number of bits that you have to specify. You can't say, write me a profitable app.
Yeah. Of course.
Right?
I wish you could.
Well, I mean, if you could, everybody else could, and if everybody did,
Yeah.
then nobody could. So
Yeah.
there's some minimum amount of information that you actually have to put it in. So here's an exercise I do with tests. Sometimes people show me their tests, and oftentimes it's really long, and I say, well, tell me the story of this. Well, if the interest rate is this and the person's over this and blah, blah, blah. So I take a highlighter and I just highlight in the test the actual information that they explained to me.
Yeah.
And there are styles of testing where you'll have this big long test and there's like 4 actual pieces of information and 1,000 tokens, 10,000 tokens that don't actually convey any information. So I it's those 4 bits of like very specific information that, yes, we need to be able to express those in the initial prompt, or you're just going to get random stuff coming out. But the language models can have a lot of context about the stuff that you say, in the same way that if you and I work on the same system for a year together, I can just go, oh, it's one of the things, and you go,
Yeah.
yeah, I know exactly what you mean. The model can have that kind of richness of context over time, especially if it's fine-tuned for your particular code base, style of working, vocabulary, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll be able to say more and more concentrated information to our language models and end up with reliable code.
I agree. This is so interesting, Kent. I mean, I could go on with questions for other several hours, but we are wrapping this up. So thank you so much for being here for this wonderful chat.
Luca, it's absolutely my pleasure, and I hope we get to see each other in person sometime soon.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm seeing also that you are not only outclassing me in engineering, but also in guitars. I see in the background. I have 2. You have like, I don't know, 6 or 7. So you win on that too.
A little more than that, yes.
Thank you, Kent, again.
Sure.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this chat valuable, you can subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the show. You can find all past episodes and learn more about the show at refactoring.fm. See you in the next episode.